It would be impossible to ignore the fact that Melville chooses many biblical names for his characters. And some of his greatest writing is in his descriptions of his characters. The narrator, Ishmael, is the teller of the story, not the main character himself. He is an observer, the rambling storyteller, and the wandering sailor. Like the biblical Ishmael, who was an outcast and an exile, he seems to have no people, no roots beyond the ships and the sea. He says about himself, "I was a good Christian, born and bred in the bosom of the infallible Presbyterian Church." And when Queequeg invites him to join him in worshiping his little idol, Ishmael, using impeccable reasoning, decides that by joining him, he is actually fulfilling the golden rule, treating the cannibal as he would want to be treated. And since he would want Queequeg to join him in Presbyterian worship, quote, "I must turn idolater." So I kindled the shavings, helped prop up the innocent little idol, offered him burnt biscuit with Queequeg, salaamed before him twice or thrice, kissed his nose. We see that Ishmael has a satirical view of his Presbyterian background, however infallible it was. He misunderstands the Christian faith and believes that all faiths are ultimately going the same direction. The crazy Captain Ahab is described as a monomaniac, possessed of one overarching, hateful ambition to annihilate the white whale Moby-Dick, thus taking vengeance for the disaster of his missing leg, quote, "devoured, chewed up, crunched by the monstrosest parmacity that ever chipped a boat, now replaced by a leg carved of whalebone. He's a grand, ungodly, godlike man," says Captain Peleg, one of the owners of the Pequod. The biblical Ahab was a wicked king, cowardly and self-serving, bringing down the whole kingdom because of his disobedience. Captain Ahab hazards the life of his crew to serve his own end of meting out vengeance on the whale. There was an infinity of firmest fortitude, a determinate, unsurrenderable willfulness in a fixed and fearless forward dedication of that glance. And not only that, but moody, stricken Ahab stood before them with a crucifixion in his face, in all the nameless regal overbearing of some mighty woe. And just as a side note, as seen in the quotation above, Melville's use of alliteration and metrical skill in writing prose is something to admire, though he packs each sentence with a density that can sometimes weigh the reader down. Moby-Dick himself is an important character in this book. He is the mythological white whale. Ahab at last came to identify with him. Not only all his bodily woes, but all his intellectual and spiritual exasperations. The white whale swam before him as the monomaniac incarnation of those malicious agencies which some deep men feel eating in them, all evil to crazy Ahab, were visibly personified and made practically assailable in Moby-Dick. He piled upon the whale's white hump the sum of all the general rage and hate felt by his whole race from Adam down. It's clear that Moby-Dick is the scapegoat for Ahab. The whale is to be blamed for all that is wrong in the world. Quote, "I see in him outrageous strength, with an inscrutable malice sinnowing it. That inscrutable thing is chiefly what I hate, and be the white whale agent, or be the white whale principal, I will wreak that hate upon him." Ahab associates the whale with God's predestining sovereignty, God's predestinating sovereignty over all things, and he has declared war upon this. He wants to kill God's providence over the world. But what Ahab misses is that God already scapegoated himself in sending his son to be crucified. He has already died and been raised to life to save the world. For God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. John 3:17. In killing Moby-Dick, Ahab thinks he will free himself from all that is eating him up on the inside. The white whale is loaded with symbolism. Melville spends a chapter explaining to the reader, through Ishmael, why it was the whiteness of the whale that above all things appalled me. He associates all that is frightening and disgusting with the color white. He calls it a color loathed, strangely hideous, that the crowning attribute of the terrible, a higher horror and a hideous whiteness. And then, after listing all these terrible associations, he calls it the very veil of the Christian's deity, dumb blankness and a colorless, all color of atheism. It is clear that Ahab has a deep resentment of God, fixes it all on the whale, and determines, in a weak imitation of all that he hates about predestination, to destroy the whale. Though he wants to kill God's predestining power, he wants to predestine himself, in a weird sense, to his own tragic end. Ahab's reflections are recorded in chapter 37. The path to my fixed purpose is laid with iron rails, whereon my soul is grooved to run. We see the religious nature of this quest of his when he, in chapter 36, leads his men in a religious rite on the deck in which the harpooners drink from the harpoon sockets, lifting them to cries and maledictions against the white whale. Even the Pequod, when Ishmael first checks out the rare old craft, is described in religious terms. Quote, her ancient decks are worn and wrinkled, like the pilgrim-worshipped flagstone in Canterbury Cathedral where Becket bled. The honest first mate, Starbuck, represents the Christian perspective. Once Ahab reveals his purpose to the crew, Starbuck is the only one to criticize him. Vengeance on a dumb brute, cried Starbuck, that simply smote thee from blindest instinct? Madness, to be enraged with a dumb thing. Captain Ahab seems blasphemous. To which Ahab answers, talk not to me of blasphemy, man. I'll strike the sun if it insulted me. Starbuck says he will have no man in his boat who is not afraid of a whale. And our narrator adds that by this he seemed to mean not only that the most reliable and useful courage was that which arises from the fair estimation of the encountered peril, but that an utterly fearless man is a far more dangerous comrade than a coward. Much later, when the Pequod is leaking the oil in the hold, Starbuck approaches the captain in his cabin to inform him of the need to stop and plug the leak. But Ahab says his own soul is full of leaks in a leaky ship. Starbuck confronts him about this carelessness towards the owners of the ship. With this, Ahab grabs his loaded musket, pointing it at the poor first mate, and lashes out, there is one God that is Lord over the earth, and one captain that is Lord over the Pequod. On deck. The brave Starbuck leaves at gunpoint, but with one parting shot. Thou hast outraged, not insulted me, sir. But for that I ask thee not to beware of Starbuck. Thou wouldst but laugh, but let Ahab beware of Ahab. Beware of thyself, old man. Starbuck's thoughts and meditations reveal that he sees Ahab's malice for what it is. He thinks, he prays, he tries to encourage himself, but he is very heavy-hearted. His, Ahab's, heaven-insulting purpose God may wedge aside. I would up heart were it not like lead. But my whole clock's run down, my heart the all-controlling weight. I have no key to lift again. Starbuck has the reader's sympathy, unlike Ahab. He seems resigned to his destiny, but he does not enter into the quest. He has no grievance with God and even begs Ahab to give up the fight. Stubb, the other first mate, has a different response to Ahab's madness. I've been thinking over it ever since, and that, the final consequence. Why so? Because a laugh's the wisest, easiest answer to all that's queer, and come what will, when comfort's always left. Yet that unfailing comfort is, it's all predestinated. Stubb is not interested in figuring it all out, so he laughs it off, but it's a hollow laugh. But he would rather not make a fuss. And the satirical comment about predestination underscores the theme of the novel, insinuating that predestination is actually a cold comfort. Queequeg is the noble savage, a powerful harpooner. He is the son of a cannibal king, a native of the island Kokovoko. He forces himself onto a whaling boat so he can go see some of Christendom. He wants to find out how to make his people better and happier once he becomes king, and he believes Christendom will have the answer. But alas, the practices of whalemen soon convinced him that even Christians could be both miserable and wicked, infinitely more so than all his father's heathens. Thought he, it's a wicked world, and in all meridians, I'll die a pagan. In fact, he decided never to return to his homeland because he was fearful Christianity, or rather Christians, had unfitted him for ascending the pure and undefiled throne of 30 pagan kings before him. But why was Queequeg looking for Christian behavior from sailors on a whaler? Stupid cannibal. But this actually illustrates what Melville is up to. Queequeg, for all of his idolatry, is more like a Christian in his behavior than anyone, except Starbuck, on the boat. I hope you see what Melville is doing here. Then there is Pip, the black cabin boy. Quote, "Oh, thou big white God aloft there somewhere in yon darkness, have mercy on this small black boy down here. Preserve him from all men that have no bowels to feel fear." Melville understood the centrality of the pulpit, and that is why he used his book to preach. In chapter 8, titled The Pulpit, he says, "What could be more full of meaning? For the pulpit is ever this earth's foremost part. All the rest comes in its rear. The pulpit leads the world. Yes, the world's a ship on its passage out, and not a voyage complete, and the pulpit is its prow." Melville was clearly at war with the doctrine of his Calvinistic background. He fought with the idea of a God who had sovereign command of his creation. He misunderstood that doctrine could be a cold, heartless, blind fate, which is far from what the Bible teaches or what Calvinists believe. Indeed, Melville is saying a great many untrue things about God, about providence, about man, and about the Christian faith. He knows full well that he is twisting God's truths as he creates a world in which a blind, malicious fate governs the world. Melville was probably as spiritually confused as his main characters, but his portrait of Ahab and Moby-Dick shows a human being rebelling against existence itself. This is why he knew he had written a wicked book. In the final chapter, in the last day of the chase, Moby-Dick is described as a godlike creature bringing judgment in his attack on the Pequod. Retribution, swift vengeance, eternal malice were in his whole aspect, and spite of all that mortal men could do, the solid white buttress of his forehead smote the ship's starboard bow till men and timbers reeled. This is why Starbuck can call Ahab blasphemous, attributing eternal malice to the one representing divine providence. Over and over, page after page, the author accuses God by means of one character or another, but chiefly through the narrator's musings. Consider these comments by Ishmael. In the first chapter, Ishmael says he was a whaler because the fates had determined it to be so, all the while cajoling me into the delusion that it was a choice resulting from my own unbiased free will and discriminating judgment. When the Pequod first cast off from Nantucket, it blindly plunged like fate into the lone Atlantic. Know ye now, Bulkington? Glimpses do ye seem to see of that mortally intolerable truth, that all deep, earnest thinking is but the intrepid effort of the soul to keep the open independence of her sea, while the wildest winds of heaven and earth conspire to cast her on the treacherous Slavish shore? There are certain queer times and occasions in this strange mixed affair we call life when a man takes this whole universe for a vast practical joke, though the wit thereof he but dimly discerns, and more than suspects that the joke is at nobody's expense but his own. Ishmael anticipates the 20th century in expressing his doubts. He sees the world as a practical joke, with a capricious God sending the world on a meaningless voyage on rough seas without a compass. This is just one step away from total atheism. But what is the point in believing in an evil God? Why not just disbelieve entirely? But Melville is uneasy. Though he is confused and wandering, attacking the Christian faith viciously, I believe he knows he is not innocent as a lamb, but is just whistling in the dark. Nancy Wilson.